Need like background music.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's the only thing with using Zoom. There's the lack of production capability. Anyway, people are joining, so thanks for joining. Welcome to this edition of Waddscon. It's a new season, during which, over the course of the next 6 to 8 months, we're going to be exploring the relationship between public relations practitioners and the media. It's really great to see people joining. Thanks for coming. Perhaps jump into the chat, say hello, let us know where you're from and what you're up to. There's a lovely community around this event, and it's great to welcome people. As ever, the event's free to access. It's organised by my own company, Wads Inc., and anything we raise through the ticket prices goes directly to our local food bank. Now, each of the speakers today has a really important story to tell about a social issue, about how they work with the media to engage the public in an important conversation. Inevitably, you're going to have questions along the way, so please drop those into the chat after each speaker has talked. I'll conduct a short Q&A with each of them, and I'm delighted. The first speaker for this new season is Jamie Klingler from Reclaim These Streets. She's got an incredible, high-profile national conversation that she created about women's safety that she wants to tell us about. Welcome, Jamie, and thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. So this will be the speed version. I'm not going to go through all of the ins and outs, but basically, tragically, when Sarah Everard's remains were found, given that I ran an events company and I had worked in magazines, I decided that I was going to hold a vigil for women to come together and grieve. I tweeted about it, and within 10 minutes, I was told that other women in Clapham were doing the same thing. We joined forces, and Reclaim These Streets was born. Now, those next 3 days were insane. Wednesday night, we'd reached out to the police already in Lambeth, and they had said, obviously, there's COVID restrictions, but we'll find a way to police around it. By the next day, Scotland Yard came in and said, absolutely not, that we were not allowed to go forward and that there was a blanket ban on protest. We ended up then finding our lawyer on Twitter, Adam Wagner, human rights lawyers. We went to high court. We had to crowd fundraise to get to high court. We sued the police for our human right to assemble. We then, the ruling was we had to go away. They had to give us the parameters and we had to follow them. While we were negotiating with Scotland Yard, they sent out a press release that we were not allowed to go ahead and it would be unlawful. So we took the decision to pivot, fundraise, and most of you will have seen what happened at the vigil, where men and policemen manhandled and arrested women at a vigil about a policeman killing a young woman. The optics were obviously obscene, but it created a national outrage and conversation that we were in the center of. And that's kind of where this 5 minutes comes in, capturing that energy and capturing that moment and continuing to be always available. Our rules on doing press, there were 10 of us, but 2 of us really did all the press. And the rules were, we said yes to all journalism students. We said no to GB News, and the rest were up to availability, but most of them, like 90% of them, were yes. I ended up doing about 300 interviews last year. And I really found out that I loved it and enjoyed it. And I'd never really done on camera or radio before. But I was given 3 lines for press for every interview or for whatever subject was up. And then I kept going with it. And as not being a politician and not coming from that world and being from Philadelphia and being mouthy, I really utilized that and utilized my own experiences, but my energy. Like, I'm not a politician. I don't talk like a politician. I'm not from England. I don't speak like I'm from England, but the passion's there. And the main thing was all about PR exercise is not women's safety not being a PR exercise, and that the government and the police acting like it was just a safety exercise doesn't work. Women's safety and women's violence at the hands of men, men's violence against women is not down to women. It's not something I can solve. It's not something my group can solve. And we were really, really keen to change that subject, to change it about, it's not where we walk home. It's not what we wear. It's not about us taking self-defense classes. It's about men not killing us. And that change and bringing those subjects and bringing those conversations to the dining room table, I think is the real place that we landed and what we've done really well. There used to be all 2 a.m. conversations of women telling their sexual assault stories. And now we talk about with our fathers, with our brothers, with our partners, how many decisions we make a day to avoid conflict and to avoid getting attacked and just to avoid feeling unsafe and what that decision tree looks like. And I think that's where we've really hit. My friends joke that I'm a producer's wet dream because I always say yes and I show up available to talk on camera wherever I am. The night that Cressida Dick resigned, there was a leaving due in Westminster. So most of the people that would have been on TV weren't. And so it was me like wall to wall on live BBC talking about police reform, where a year ago, I never spoke about the police before. I never thought about the police before. So really being up for the learning from other women's groups, but taking the mic and really, really fighting for the good fight has been the year of my life. That started with a tweet that I never expected, but raised my hand, stood up and for the cause. And this is now my life and will continue to be. I'm trying to figure out what I do next with it. But I think it's really important that we kept the line and kept showing up, like we kept giving amplification about women's safety throughout the course of the year, because it could have easily gone away after 2 days.
Jamie, what an incredible story. Thank you. And your energy clearly shines through as you present. Talk to us about the relationship with Twitter. So this relationship between Twitter and media. So this campaign started very much grassroots on Twitter, but then how have you managed that? And then
I hadn't even met the other women in person, and we didn't meet because of Twitter or because of COVID restrictions. So it very much was, we met online. We had everything done on Zoom. The first 200 interviews were all done on Zoom. And then all of our press releases were on Twitter. We had a shared reclaimthesestreets@gmail.com, really simple. And we would just take them and we would alternate BBC and ITV because they don't want the same person on twice in a row. But it like, I can't tell you how basic our spreadsheets were. This was not by any means some big rollout. It was all really reactive. Most of it was just reactive to what horrors the police were doing to try to silence us and shut us down. And then the court case, and we just won the appeal and we won the first court case and now they're appealing. But just always being available and always keeping to the same lines. Like we haven't strayed from our story. We haven't strayed from our lines. The movement of it being about one young woman that was killed last March to being about all women that have suffered violence at the hands of men, and making sure that we keep going and really recognizing that women of color are not featured on the covers of newspapers. We did a vigil for Biba and Nicole. We worked very closely with Mina Smallman. We worked with the Kidbrook community about Sabina Nessa. And so we're very conscious of women in public spaces. So we don't touch domestic violence because there's so many organizations that do that. So again, finding out where we could not step on other people's toes and we could really make an impact.
Your media strategy is interesting. One, why didn't you talk to GB News? Two, why journalism students?
Because they're going to carry the flag. They're the ones that are going to take it to the future, and they're the ones that don't get access. And so spending the time with those young women, usually young women that were coming to us internationally as well, is really important because they're the ones that are going to be in these seminars in 6 years' time. So it's really about giving them the respect and the time so that their skills grow, so that they're ready for the fight, and that their storytelling is where it needs to be to amplify it and get it to as many people as possible on platforms that we might not hit. So some of the interviews I did that got turned into TikToks, like I don't know how to do that kind of editing or storytelling, but I'm more than happy. And 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I was interviewed by a young woman from Lviv, who at the end of that interview, I found out she was from Lviv, and got her on Woman's Hour the next day, got her on Times Radio, got her a piece in Harper's Bazaar. And, like that kind of using our skills that I've developed over 20 years of working in magazines and comms and getting young women up to speed is my responsibility.
That's brilliant. Tell me about GB News before we move on. Why no to GB News?
Just because they don't have a big enough audience, and they're going to be trying to trip us up and give us a hard time. And I'm just not up for the battle. I love going on LBC. I love hitting a conservative audience that might not be interested in what I have to say and getting my lines right for that audience. But going into an attack situation that's about shock and stuff, just not my style. And I just don't have the energy when I've got 60 other outlets asking to talk to me.
Fair enough. You spoke briefly there about your legacy and lifting up young women journalists, providing them access, your level of access. That's incredible. What's next for you personally and for Reclaim? Where'd you go from here?
So the appeal, or they're asking permission to appeal. So we're working on that. There's 4 of us left, and it's been basically a full-time job that's not monetized at all. So trying to figure out where I go from here, because I've applied for a couple of roles and I'm the story, which makes it really hard in a PR world. But I've got a TED Talk on April 30th in Kingston, which I'm excited about my journey to becoming an activist, which kind of really happened overnight and unexpectedly, but also figuring out what women's work life is like and what kind of things we do about women's welfare, where you're bringing in Pregnant Then Screwed, you're bringing in flex appeal, you're bringing in stuff about menopause and all of the areas where we get sidelined and where the wage gap happens and grows, and kind of having an umbrella for all of that. Because right now, just tweeting one day a year, although we all enjoy it and we laugh about it and point at companies that do it really badly, we need to look at the structural reasons it's happening and how it's getting established and how it's growing every year, and really get companies to actually value us, because it's better for their bottom line as well, to keep us and to be a best place for women to work.
So Kelly O'Halloran from Birmingham City University makes the point that as an activist, you've moved from a comms role into actively engaging with people that you strongly oppose. Has that had an impact on you mentally? You seemed quite energized by it.
I love it. And I love the fight. What I have struggled with a lot more is so much of my bravado is being this girl from Philly and talking about dead women all day and trying to walk around and live my life in Camden has been very difficult. So there's been quite a bit of counseling, and it's been work that I've never done, and women trusting us with their survival stories, and everyone trying to like tag us into every time something happens with an officer, and learning to say no and learning not to take on everything, to take on what we can and to assist where we can, but not to fight every fight for everybody, has been quite difficult.
I joked when we first spoke about this that you were never going to be able to fit it into 5 minutes, and there was almost certainly a TEDx in this, and clearly there is a TEDx. There's a lot of interest in the story. How do you balance that personal dynamic between you becoming the story, you've already cited it, and the opportunities that come from it?
I haven't really figured it out.
No.
Women's Day, you can print money. I did a event that was like bingo for equality, because it's the only day of the year that I can get paid the speaker's fees that men get paid all the time. And I need to figure out how to market the activism talks and the women's safety talks, but a lot of them are just one-offs, which isn't a business, which isn't fulfilling enough to make it repeat business. So it's really hard to figure out how to pay us. Like, I've got asked by a major company last week to come and give an inspiring talk to their multinational company for no money, and stop asking women to work for free. Stop asking anybody to do that for free, because there's not money in activism. I've given a year of my life in service because I run an events company that didn't do any events because of the pandemic. So, but now I've got to figure out what the next steps are. I'm for hire. But like, how do we make this work? I've been working with Meenal Viz, who is the young woman that was on the cover of Vogue, who was an NHS doctor who protested while pregnant about not having PPE. And the two of us are together, and we both fought the system and won in court, but neither of us are sure on how to actually make this our careers, because people say it's amazing and everybody wants to give accolades, and I can have a ton of awards here, but that's not going to amplify or pay bills. So we've got to figure out how to really value that.
What are you going to say? What's the story of your TED Talk?
So it's Reclaim Your Life. In the lockdown in April 2020, I quit drinking. I lost 7 stone and then became an activist.
Brilliant. What's the date for that, for anyone that's listening?
It's April 30th, TEDx Kingston.
Brilliant. Thank you. Jamie, thanks. I mean, it's an incredible story. Thanks for taking the time out. I'm, delighted that you said yes to me and took this opportunity to share the story with the Waddscon audience. I really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.
Thank you. Next up, we have We go to Bristol. We've got Catherine Frankpitt. Catherine, do you want to come and say hello? Turn your mic on. Brilliant. Hello. Really good to see you.
Hi. Oh,
Hello.
and you've just frozen. Well, that was I said that would happen, didn't I? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah. The perils of Zoom. We're good.
I know, literally, as we went live. Okay, great. Shall I crack on, or are you interested?
Well, let me introduce you first. You're too keen. So Catherine is from Strike Communications, an agency she runs in Bristol. She's going to talk about a project in Bristol that tackled Britain's slave past, another important social issue. Catherine, you're welcome. You can go now.
Excellent. I should go. Right, I'm going to see if I can get these slides up on the screen first. Can you see that? Can you see them as slides, or can you see?
Yeah, we're good.
Cool.
We're good.
So some similarities in some ways with what Jamie's been doing, in that it's a really, really important issue and very emotive, that invokes strong feelings. The difference was very much behind the scenes and not a face of it at all. I'm very pleased to say. So in April 2017, my client, which is the 150-year-old concert venue, Colston Hall, Bristol's biggest venue, announced its intention to change its name and remove the perceived associations with Bristol's most notorious slave trader, Edward Colston. The venue was just beginning a £100 million capital transformation programme, so we announced that the name would change when the work was complete, sort of 3 years later. Bristol has long been troubled with unreconciled links to the transatlantic slave trade. Even though Colston Hall, the venue, had no relationship or links with Edward Colston and no money had come from him, just that perceived association through the name meant that many audiences and some artists, Massive Attack being the most high profile, refused to come in the building at all. So when we announced the intention to change the name in 2017, many people locally welcomed that intention, but it was also seen as deeply controversial. There were thousands of posts on social media with strong opinions on both sides, people threatening to boycott the hall. There was a petition set up campaigning to keep the name, petition set up campaigning to change it. And we did about 20 interviews with the media in 48 hours with the chief exec. So that was 3 years earlier. Fast forward now to summer 2020, we'd planned to make the announcement of the new name in April, but been delayed by the pandemic. So as a music charity, the majority of the staff had been furloughed, and the work had just been paused. Then the death of George Floyd happened, followed by the weeks of Black Lives Matter protests around the world. And then on June the 7th, as most people know, even if you're not from Bristol, the statue of Edward Colston, which sat just a stone's throw away from Colston Hall, was torn from its plinth and dumped in the harbour. Tensions were really high in Bristol, and the world's media were suddenly focused on the city. So we knew we had to act fast and carefully. We didn't want to inflame tensions around the situation. The police were really concerned, as was the council, and we didn't want people to accuse us of taking a knee-jerk reaction. So we released a statement first thing the next morning, and in this we held up our hands that COVID had distracted us and slowed our progress, and admitted that events had now shown us we needed to increase the pace of change. We publicly reasserted our commitment to changing the name and said that it was our intention to do so by the autumn. And then 1 week later, as a commitment of our intention, we invited media along to the building to witness the historic moment. The giant Colston Hall lettering that you can see was taken down from the facade, and it felt like a really powerful visual statement that got an awful lot of media coverage. Now fast forward again to 3 months later to September 2020. We'd originally planned to make the name announcement a big in-person event, but 2 weeks before, Boris announced new COVID restrictions, and so we had to quickly reimagine the whole thing as a virtual announcement. So changing the name of a 153-year-old building in a heightened climate with strong views on both sides is a big deal. And this announcement had a lot of work that we needed it to do. Firstly, to avoid another backlash like the one we'd had in 2017, we needed to make it clear that the name had come from the hearts and voices of people in the city, which it had. There'd been 3 years of consultation, rather than it feeling like a predominantly white-led organisation putting a new name on the city. We also needed the messaging to resonate with the global audience. We'd had so much attention on it already. And we wanted to take the opportunity to try and start moving the narrative on from it being all about the name, which it had been for many years, and remind people that there was more to the building than the name, with a focus on its purpose to bring unity and joy through music. So we took the decision that everyone would be able to watch the announcement at the same time, rather than giving it to media first, which we knew was a risk because we knew media would want it. But there was so much interest in it, and we thought it would just give us more control over the narrative. So we explained what we were doing really carefully to media, and got them to kind of buy into it, and offered them things that they could have that others wouldn't. Then we created a special microsite to sit on Colston Hall's website so that we could live stream the announcement through that. And we got the date into media's diaries in advance, emailed key stakeholders so that they would be primed and ready to watch. But we didn't start promoting it to the general public on social media until the night before, because of the risk of big crowds turning up the next morning, especially anti-BLM protests. We were still really concerned about the tensions. We were also terrified the name was going to leak, because it's been such a big secret, and it just didn't. And then because of the COVID restrictions, we were only allowed one film crew to one media outlet to come in. So we set them up to act as the pool camera, a bit like they do with royal weddings and big events like that. So other media had the choice to either use their feed or to plug directly into our live stream feed through our online means. We filmed in advance, especially created poem by Bristol poets, and we used local people, including some of the previous critics, to read the lines, filmed in locations around the city, so that it would reflect that sense of community and not be about just the building. The name that it became, Bristol Beacon, was actually said several times through the poem without revealing until the end that Beacon was the name. But that really helped avoid it being one single person becoming the soundbite that media would clip up and use. The live streamed announcement we did first thing in the morning without any hitch at all, and we had speeches from Colston Hall's chief exec Louise Mitchell and Bristol Mayor Marvin Rees, who'd obviously been very high profile around the whole Colston slave trade issue. So they gave live speeches from this stage, which was filmed, and then we cut straight to the pre-filmed poem where the name was revealed. We had obviously media camped out outside. All the local media turned up anyway, so we then went out and did back-to-back interviews with them in person, and then a Zoom press conference for others that were further afield. And then we turned the whole lot into a quick media package with the speeches and the poem video, and got them out to media before lunchtime, ready for lunchtime news. And in the end, the announcement was watched in over 15 countries and ingested by over 40 media outlets around the world, as far afield as Malaysia. We don't have figures on the number of reach, actually, it went so far. We captured over 300 pieces of media coverage, and my highlight being New York Times, which is something I always wanted to get into. And by lunchtime, we were trending at number 3 on Twitter in the UK. And this time, the difference compared to 3 years previously was almost all of the coverage and comments we received, apart from a few silly comments, was positive. And the majority of people accepted the name straight away. And in time, the building next door, Colston Tower, has now renamed itself as Beacon Tower. And there's even talk of selling Beacon Baps in the cafe.
Thank you. Thanks, Catherine. It's great story. Great story. There's some similarities, aren't there, with Jamie's story in your media approach, that you were public first, you had very clear messaging, very clear lines, and then you took pool feeds out to media. Is that fair, do you think?
Yeah, and we went, and partly because of the COVID restrictions as well, which is probably not dissimilar to Jamie, we worked slightly differently in a way. I mean, I've been doing this for a long time. I've never in my life been involved in making a global announcement in a pandemic, with the COVID rules changing pretty much daily. So some of it was how can we make this work? And I think it's sort of, in the end, it played to our advantages, because media had to be more understanding. We just couldn't we couldn't get them all in to the same space to do it. So if you've got to do it online anyway, and you've already got people and some really important people, or just a lot of people with an interest in it, and who, if you're going to do it online, you might as well just do it to everybody at the same time. So it was just but working with the media, and we were, you know, there was so much tension in Bristol in that period as well, after the statue came down. And in fact, the plinth is in the news again today locally, because they finally, after 2 years, announced what they're going to do with the empty plinth. So it's just always mindful of not sparking tensions. So, you know, so we wanted to just, the best way is to be able to control the narrative, if you like, or present rather than control the narrative to everybody, and just talk to the media and say, what can we create for you that will give you something special? And most of the time it was just, you know, giving them a bit of an early heads up on it and offering them one-to-one interviews, and then getting that poem and all the video footage turned around super fast. So we did the announcement at 8:30 in the morning, done by 9. Then we did the interviews sort of 10, and by 11 we'd got the package that was out, that people could, that we sort of sent out, so that they could be really quick putting the news out.
Steph Brown asks in the chat, and if you've any questions for any of our panelists, please do jump into the chat. Did you get any backlash from the media at all? I guess they were already operating under.
No, and I think what was the most interesting thing in all of this was, you know, it was 3 years earlier, and I mean, partly how the public view had changed because of Black Lives Matter protests. That just in 2017, when we did a big media briefing, a big announcement saying that it was the intention to change the name, and those 20 interviews that we did virtually round the clock over 48 hours, and it was so. There was a lot less support. I mean, there was still support, but it was much harder questioning. And in that 3-year period, just the work, and particularly that summer with the George Floyd and the protests, and maybe everybody was just had been dealing with COVID as well. People seemed to understand it. So the thing that, and so it made it easier in some ways, because it had been warmed up by the events. The thing that we thought that the biggest thing, that we'd get a big backlash about the name that had been chosen as much as anything, and we didn't get that either. So I think we had such a full, well thought through package of stuff, and a really solid, and you know, the process that we'd gone through to get to the name as well. It wasn't just made up, it was genuine. It was 3 years of going out to the community, you know, which the Bristol Beacon team did. So it was genuine. So I think it was a much more pleasant experience this time. It was a lot of work, but really positive.
Where do you think this journey starts, this journey of recognition for past history in an organization? Is it a public issue, or is it a leadership issue, or a combination of the both?
I don't know. Well, it's really, you know, I've worked with Bristol Beacon as is for since about 2014 now. So, and watched them on this journey and kind of been part of this journey, but also one step removed, which in some ways makes it a less personal experience for me, which can be easier. And I think you know, the issue of the name, and particularly Bristol Beacon, because Colston Hall is like this big, as you can see from the picture, big gold venue in the centre of Bristol. So it's a massive symbol of the city, and the name has for decades has been a controversial issue that people don't agree on. And in the end, the board and the staff, you know, and the trustees at Bristol Beacon took the decision that they were, you know, a charitable organisation tasked with running the venue. It had to be what felt right for them. They had to take responsibility, because they're never going to please everybody all of the time, but they had to do what was right for the values of the organisation. And the values of the organisation are, it's creating unity and joy through music. And if it's not creating unity, and there are people that won't come to it, and it reflects something that is not aligned with their values, then regardless of the critics, you got to change the name to something that is inoffensive. You might not like it, but so that doesn't mean forgetting your history. And so there will be sort of public art and lots of things in the building that reflect, and like they're doing the statue, you know, that we're not trying to get rid of the history. It's just, you don't need to have it as great big gold lettering down the side of a building in a way that means that people won't come to it. So it was really interesting. They just owned it as their decision and said, it isn't right. It doesn't. So I think that is when it's something like this and there are such strong views, it has to come down to what is aligned with your values, I think, at the end of the day.
Sorry, did you address diversity within the comms team? Question from Chris. And was that important?
As in having a diverse
Views within the team, yeah.
I guess everybody was on board. I'm not sure I quite understand the question.
I know you involved the community, but how diverse was the team working on the transformation?
Oh, I see. Sorry. Yeah, and as part that there is a recognition within the team, not just the comms team, actually within the whole Bristol Beacon organisation, that they need to live their values and be more diverse, and are working really hard to do that. And they've created what they've called their transformation promise as part of the transformation of the building, which is to live those values, and because it is not as diverse as it wants to be. And so what they have done is and recognize that, and through this and through the 3 years of developing what the name should be, making sure that the people that they engage with and consult and bring in to support on the consultation as well as respond to it have that greater diversity, and so that it's done as authentically as possible.
Okay. Catherine, we're out of time. Thanks so much for another brilliant presentation. There's a couple of questions we're going to have to leave in the chat, but what we'll do is I'll email those over to you, and if we could we'll do a write-up afterwards and answer those. But thanks so much, Catherine. Really appreciate that. See you. Right, next up, Jessica. Hello. Welcome.
Hello.
Hi. So we're joined by Jessica from Sparrowhawk Communications. She's going to talk about a project called Since 9/11. It's a project that aims to teach young people and build a legacy of hope from the tragedy of September the 11th, 2001. Jessica, welcome. The stage is yours.
Thank you. It's so fascinating to hear Jamie and Catherine's campaigns. I'm a PR and communications consultant specializing in education, culture and sustainability. And the brief for the campaign we're talking about today was to secure national and international media coverage for one of my clients, a small but a very ambitious education charity called Since 9/11, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. So that's last September. A bit of background on the charity. Since 9/11 was set up in 2011 to ensure that the legacy of 9/11 is one that builds hope from tragedy. And it is a very small charity. It has just one part-time member of staff, but a very energetic and well-networked team of trustees. Of course, as we all know, no pupil in school today was born when 9/11 took place, and actually frighteningly few know what happened on that day. And the charity sends speakers into UK schools to give personal accounts of what happened. So British people, for example, who were working or living in the US at the time, for example. And they also have a free education program to stimulate discussion about extremism and about terrorism in the classroom. So the aim of the campaign was to substantially raise the profile of this small charity, but also to be better known, particularly in education circles, for their resources for young people. I was commissioned for a few months from July to September. And I think there were 3 key elements to the work that I did. So the first was really to interest national and international media in the volunteers, the very small group of volunteers who had personal testimonies of 9/11. The second was to secure coverage for a report with UCL on the extent to which teachers feel able to talk about extremism in the classroom. So this was a report that the charity had commissioned from UCL. So I was working closely with the academics there. And I think the third element was to secure coverage of the charity's memorial event on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. And they had invited some very high profile speakers, including the former head of MI6. The result was sort of extensive coverage, which included the charity's key messages. So from the Wall Street Journal to BBC Breakfast, to the Today programme, Sky News, Telegraph Times, L'Echo, major consumer magazines, major world media outlets, and also all education sector outlets. So it was about 2.19 million views and an average domain authority of about 79. But more importantly, perhaps, was that the charity's resources were downloaded and accessed more than 103,000 times. And the PR has been ongoing. So they're asked for responses on those key topics, since then. Obviously, this session is about engaging the media on challenging social issues. And I think there are several reasons why the campaign was successful. I matched high-profile people to the media outlets that wanted to talk to them. And I prepared the volunteers for media interviews, really thoroughly. And I carefully chose which ones they should do. I also tactically used sort of exclusives as a way of kind of garnering further interest from the media. And I really carefully considered which exclusives to give and who to give them to. I used the Press Association to do videos of interviews. So I set up interviews with the Press Association and asked them to, record those as videos. And that was then used as key assets by broadcasters and led to sort of, a lot of broadcast coverage. One other key aspect was exploiting the fact that, of course, lots of people at that time were talking about 9/11, but the charity had a news hook really that others didn't have, and that was the young people and sort of talking about extremism in the classroom angle. I also think similar to some of the things we've heard before, I didn't give everything at once. I sort of managed to gain some sort of momentum for the story through the personal testimonies. That was the first stage, and then putting out the research on extremism, and then the event. So that was a very quick overview.
Thank you very much, Jessica. Interesting, you like Catherine before you, and this question here from Anne Nichols, you used a pooled approach to broadcast media. How do you set that up with an organization like PA? Do you have to pay PA? Is the production costs? How do you go about that?
Yeah, no, I didn't pay. I think if you interest them enough in the story, they feel sort of, that they're going to be the first to put it out. And you ask for favors. I think that's one of the things I learned, that sort of if you don't ask for the favors, you don't get them. So I just brazenly kind of asked, can you video that? Because I know that sort of broadcasters would be keen to have that, and then they did.
Question from Laura Sutherland. Your brief was to achieve media coverage, but what was the impact on the organisation? You spoke a little bit about that. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, so I mean, it was so the charity's resources, they have an education program for young people talking about extremism and terrorism. The charity's resources were downloaded and accessed more than 103,000 times. But also, it put the charity on the map in terms of sort of international media, but also, it means that when those topics come up again, the charity will be asked by media. They're known to be have those key spokespeople, whether it's sort of head teachers or people who have lived through 9/11 and experts on extremism.
What's the challenges you face in dealing with a volunteer community of spokespeople that don't necessarily have media training? How do you deal with that?
Yeah,
such high profile opportunities.
Well, absolutely. I think that's absolutely crucial because, these people, I was asking those people to tell those traumatic stories time and time again, possibly 3 times, 4 times in a day over a period of, several days. And I think, we have a duty of care there. There's a real responsibility to know, has that person actually just had enough now? How is that journalist? I was dealing with journalists from, obviously across the country, but also internationally, some of whom obviously I didn't know exactly the tack they would go for. So I think, I had to sort of keep a really clear watching brief on how those volunteers were doing, what kind of amount of time we were asking from them, but also how, was this too harrowing for them to go through? And that's something that sort of, every day I was just sort of checking on that.
Can I ask a personal question? What's your memory of 9/11? Where were you? I know exactly where I was and what I was doing.
I was a trainee journalist on the Reuters trainee program, and I was in the trainees newsroom, and we were learning how to sort of file what they called snaps, which were first takes. So it was really quite a very strange experience, a very horrendous thing to see the news, and then sort of, suddenly fresh graduate asked to sort of write about it. But yeah, how can you ever sort of do justice to a story like that?
Yeah. Okay. What an incredible place to be. Tell us a little bit. So your news hub was clearly the anniversary, the 20th anniversary, but how, there's presumably a lot of stakeholders trying to engage the media around the various causes around 9/11. How did you cut through?
Yeah, there were. I mean, there are survivors groups who were organizing their own events. I think, we kept to, or I kept to sort of the key messages and the unique media angle that the charity had, and that was one about young people, and about sort of the fact that there are, young people do not know what happened on that day, and we need to sort of make sure that that conversation in the classroom about extremism and terrorism, is had. That was one key element that other organisations, I'd say, didn't have. The other thing was that, it's a fantastic charity. It's a small charity, but a fantastic one. And the volunteers were very, keen to be helpful. And so, we use that. And I think Catherine said it as well, being available all the time, making sure that sort of you answer the phone, always, you go a long way in terms of sort of cutting through if you say yes a lot. I mean, I didn't say yes to all media. I had to prioritize because there were only so many sort of hours in the day and so many volunteers. But generally speaking, I said yes to a lot.
Where's the story now? Where's the charity now? Since 9/11 now? And what's the legacy of the activity that you did?
Yeah, so I mean, they're doing well. They've got their charity resources are being downloaded by schools. I think that the impact means that sort of people know who they are. But onto the next time that moment in time when we can raise the profile again.
Okay, Jessica, thank you so much for coming on Waddscon and telling your story, and another really important story, and really fascinating to learn how you engage the media around it. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you. So finally, we're joined by Ben Miller from Common Goal. Ben in Barcelona. It's good to see you. Ben is going to talk about working with the media to unite the football community for common good. Quite an incredible story. Welcome, Ben.
Thanks, Stephen, and hi everybody. Shall I just
go for it
off and explain a little bit about Common Goal? Well, firstly, thank you very much to the other participants. I hope I can do some justice in following up with those incredible stories. My name's Ben Miller, and I work for Common Goal as a senior advisor and one of the founding team of what is a collective social impact movement in global football. Common Goal is a movement led by individual professional players and managers who pledge 1%, a minimum of 1% of their salary, to a collective fund that invests in community-based organizations around the world that use football as a social empowerment tool. It was based on the understanding that there was a disconnect between the world of football and sport for development and the football industry. It was also based on the idea that there was a complete lack of understanding, genuine understanding about how the unique social equity and the cultural equity of football could be implemented in a sensible, sustainable, effective way. So there are lots of individual initiatives happening and very few initiatives connecting the dots in football. And also through my background, which was originally in TV production and then working with individual athletes, I understood that they held this incredible influence, albeit quite often ephemeral influence within this ecosystem, and how could we harness that? So simple idea to create this link between players and professional managers and community-based organizations through walking the talk and actually putting your hands in your pocket and pledging 1% of your salary, which, you know, no matter how much you earn, you know, you're left with the 99%. So it sounded quite simple and quite necessary in terms of where football was at the time. So you know, the players had a bad reputation. Football administrators had a horrific reputation in terms of all the corruption scandals that had happened. And so it seemed to be the right moment just to shine a light on the fact that there was a very simple way of changing that narrative, and working in a collective way, in the same way as you do actually on a football pitch. So no matter how good you are as an individual, you can't win anything if it's just you. You know, you need your teammates around you. And unfortunately, we could only find one player in the first sort of 6 months of developing this idea who would actually commit to pledging 1% of his salary. And that was largely because you have to go through all these filters, right? And so these elite athletes have agents, and the agents have a specific focus, which normally isn't too, it's changing actually quite a lot now, thankfully. But not that interested in, you know, in social impact and social issues. So we had one player who's a Spanish guy called Juan Mata, who currently is at Manchester United, a World Cup winner, Champions League winner, successful guy. And the idea was to launch with 11 players, which would engage the media and create this big story, this big counter narrative. But with just one player, we weren't sure whether it was going to work. But it was what there was, so we just decided to go for it. And I literally just called up everybody that I knew from the media. And actually, the first journalist I spoke to, who was the best paid journalist in the world, on the basis of that very first conversation that I'd had with anyone outside of a very small group of people that were sort of developing the idea, there and then he agreed to pledge 1% of his salary to Common Goal. So that gave me an indication. Okay, so I think we're onto something that people can get their heads around. And yeah, and from that very moment, I've always picked a sort of an alpha media partner for any stage in development of Common Goal. And I think it's really important to get the right one. So in this case, it was a first-person platform from the US, but with a large UK audience called the Players Tribune, in which the athletes themselves tell the stories. So that allowed Juan to explain why he was committing to this. It also coincided with, and sometimes that there's a sort of counterintuitive thing that it was the day that Neymar was being presented in PSG. So a Qatari-based club for over 200 million quid. And there he was saying, you know, this is a decision from the corazón, from the heart, not from, you know, nothing about money. And everyone's just like, we've heard all this stuff so many times before. We just thought that Common Goal was the perfect, authentic sort of counter narrative to that kind of tired messaging in the football industry. And yeah, and it was picked up by 300 media, and it became a top 10 trending topic globally on Twitter. And I guess the proof is that subsequently we got contacted by a World Cup winner from Germany, a guy called Mats Hummels, who wanted to join. And we also got an email to the info account from Giorgio Chiellini, the captain of Italy, saying that he wanted to join. And from then the movement's grown, and there's now over 210 athletes and managers, 45% of which are women. And I think the media outreach continues to develop based around, I think more now around specific campaigns related to specific social issues. For example, gender equity, or at the moment, just this morning, talking about launching Play Proud, which is an LGBTQ plus platform, it's a coalition of clubs coming out from Canada, the US, and Mexico, that have all committed to 100 hours of LGBTQ plus inclusion training, which is a really interesting statement at a time where obviously we've got a World Cup coming up in Qatar at the end of the year. And so we're building the campaigns around specific issues, and continuing to develop relationships with new platforms as well. And that's pretty much where we are now with Common Goal.
Talk to me a sensitive issue. How do you square campaigning around an issue like gender or sexual diversity and the Qatar, the World Cup in Qatar? I guess you can't.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think in terms of, well, yeah, gender equity. I think that within a network of community-based organisations, so there's at the moment there's 140 high impact community organisations, and many of them are addressing. So we're aligned to the global goals, and many of them are addressing Global Goal 5, which is gender equity. So these community organisations are empowering girls and young women to take leadership positions, to access education, the employment market, etc., using football as the tool. So as the community-based organisations are doing that, when we find somebody who feels personally aligned, an athlete or a coach who feels aligned to that cause, we match the two of them together. And then in terms of messaging, sometimes you don't have to be too specific. We launched the Anti-Racist Project last year, which has actually picked up the alpha, sort of my ideal media partner to lead with that was the New York Times, which has already been mentioned. And they agreed to it straight away. And the time that I spoke to the contact there, he was like, yesterday we were talking about how sick we are of every time there's a racist incident in football, everybody condemns it, and then the next weekend comes around, games start again, and everyone just forgets about it, and nothing actually happens. And similarly, yesterday, speaking to somebody from The Athletic, which now has over 1 million subscribers in the US and the UK, so a pretty good partner for the LGBTQ plus Play Proud platform, whose editor-in-chief is gay, actually. So knowing, like, okay, so that was likely to interest him, but also he was like, he sat in an interview with the Premier League and various Premier League clubs 3 years ago talking about homophobia in football, and from then absolutely nothing tangible has happened. So we're just focused on action, and about Qatar and homosexuality being illegal there, and workers' rights, human rights. We don't necessarily, as Common Goal, specifically need to talk about that. We just set it up in the context that people understand that there's this context happening, and that if football is going to continue in the way it was before and is slowly changing, then we will end up with World Cups in Qatar, we will end up with World Cups in Russia, and we will end up with oligarchs owning clubs, and we'll end up with all kinds of reputational issues that are happening. So I think just by focusing a counter narrative, you don't need to be too explicit. So we don't need to call out FIFA. One of the things that a success, so I think Nielsen did some work for us pro bono, and they found that there was a 98% positive sentiment around Common Goal in the media coverage. And that's really helped us develop relationships. So we signed a 3-year deal recently with Adidas, in which they pledged 1% of global ball sales, which is massive for us. That they sell a lot of footballs. So and one of the deciding factors of that was just looking at not only the media coverage, but like the diversity of it, of all the different platforms, but also this incredibly positive sentiment.
Talk to us about the mediation of talent. I mean, anyone in the UK cannot fail to not know about Marcus Rashford and the campaigning, the agency he recognises he has as an individual for activism, for campaigning, in that case around food poverty. You talked about the disintermediation of players being protected by a ring of agents and coaches and clubs and so forth, but it seems that increasingly the individual players are recognising their own agency and power and disintermediating these structures and control, right? Is
Yeah,
that fair?
yeah, it's fair, and you know, and thank goodness, because like it's like any other working group that, you know, you have people who are passionate about things and people who are a bit less interested in things. But for those that feel passionate about an issue, they definitely shouldn't be afraid to use their platform to shine a light on it and to try to create positive change. In the case of Marcus, you know, obviously he shares a dressing room with Juan Mata at Manchester United. Yeah, you know, we've spoken to him and his brother, and it's amazing what he's done. And just like, I just really urge them to try and join the dots and do it in a collective fashion, because it's only really by collaborating that we'll like create sustainable, scalable social change. But yeah, I definitely, I think an increasing amount of players, the younger ones, are aware of the fact that they're almost half the members of Common Goal are women. I think that's an intuitive understanding of the need for collective action and the struggle for equal rights that they've all lived and experienced as professional athletes in a male-dominated sport. In terms of the broadly, the younger athletes, that there aren't many people who aren't aware of racial justice issues or the climate crisis. And it's like, okay, what is a sensible way for me to try to use my platform to address that, while allowing me to learn all about it and experience a whole new area of life, which I think is really good for well-being. But that's sort of slightly different issue, but something that we're working on proof points with Pippa Grange, who is the former head of psychology of the England national team. So we're actually working with her to show that, to demonstrate that. Also, it's good for your brand in terms of brands choose to work with Marcus Rashford because of what he stands for outside the pitch. He's also pretty good at football as well. So it's sort of ticking lots of boards. There's a well-being, there's a brand, and also that there's the impact itself. So I think by focusing relentlessly on impact, I think we've got loads of support internationally from the media because they see us as credible. So this is not about an ego. This isn't about an individual player or an individual group of players. It's about a collective effort. It's not even about common goal. It's about the power that football can have if it decides to implement team play.
Brilliant, Ben. I want to thank you for a really great presentation. Again, another example of incredible social impact through public relations and practice. And with that, we're done. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Next month, we're going to be back. We're going to be talking specifically about pitching journalists. So we'll have 4 practitioners who, with lessons they've learned and techniques they've developed during lockdown, for getting hold of journalists and landing a pitch. Until then, I want to thank Jamie, Catherine, Jessica, and Ben. But most of all, thank you all for joining. It's been a really great session. Have a great day. Thank you.